My name is Giles. We've been missionaries in Spain for 11 years now. I went to Spain to do youth ministry. I was a youth pastor here in the States, and then we went to Spain to do the same. As usually happens in missions, if you are there long enough, you end up getting promoted, and then you have to take care of others. So it's kind of, and then you, the more experience you have, the less you get to do. It's kind of, no, I'm just kidding. But no, you end up having to care for others because others are coming in new and others cared for you, and it's kind of that parent-child taking care of new people. So after we've been there, I think it was 5 or 6 years, I was working as the language and orientation coordinator for our field for all the new people that were coming in. And the last 2 years, I've been the director for our field. So it's overseeing all the different send missionaries that we have in Spain. And then also, we've been working with setting up a team for new people that are coming in that aren't necessarily certain where they're going to go yet, and helping them work through that transition. And identity has been a thing that we have most certainly had to deal with. And we've seen the challenges that being a new missionary on the field gives to missionaries. Now, I want you to hear me. I'm going to speak in generalities, okay? So, I could say all this, and then you could go to the field like, oh, that didn't happen to me. Because actually, a lot of the stuff didn't happen to me. So I am seeing things that's happening in new missionaries, and it's like, oh, okay, that didn't happen to me, because I had a different sort of experience. But I've seen it happen in a lot of other situations. The other thing I want to preface by saying is I am going to speak now about challenges to identity and challenges in being going overseas and being a missionary. So it could sound like I'm being really negative, and I don't mean to be negative, because I think that it's really awesome. Missions is amazing, and people always want to try to feel sorry for me that I'm a missionary, and like, oh, you've given up so much to leave America and go somewhere else. And I'm like, suckers, I live in Spain. I love my life. I got mountains and beach. I got a great life. You don't need to feel sorry for me, but people can't imagine how horrible that must be. And for me, it's phenomenal. And I think you can go to another country, and to me, maybe it's just because I'm an otter on that whole personality chart. If you do the lion, beaver, golden retriever, otter, I don't know if you've ever done that, but or phlegmatic, melancholic, sanguine, and choleric. I would be sanguine, which is the one who's always looking for fun. And to me, the key is, if you're going to a new country, you just got to find what's fun. What do you love? What's neat that you can do here that you can't do back there? And I was speaking to some missionaries who were really suffering in Siberia. And I was asking, and they were just talking about how difficult it was, how bleak the landscape is, how cold it is, how there's nothing to do. And I said, well, what do they do? And they said, well, hockey and saunas. And I said, well, are you into hockey? No. Do you ever go to the saunas? No. Like, what are you doing in Siberia then? I mean, if you're in Siberia, you need to be like a student of saunas, and you're like going to become the sauna expert, and you know all the eucalyptus branches that they used to beat each other with, and whatever. You're going to be that. That's what you do. You're going to be a sauna guy. And if you live in Siberia, and you figure it out how to have fun with that. So, but I think one of the things that really makes it difficult, I think in some ways you could argue that foreign missions, especially if you're going to a country where you don't speak the language, that also changes things a lot. So coming from a Spanish context, I am speaking from the situation of those who are coming that don't speak the language, although even still, we've had those who've come with the language and they've experienced the same, but perhaps to a slightly lesser degree. As far as identity goes, you're going to discover my great drawing skills here. What I'm drawing right now is a stool. Can you tell? 3-legged stool. There it is. Ready? You can pretend that's a stool, right? Okay. Now, the leg is 3 legs. Belonging, worth, and significance. And they talk about significance and belonging being like kind of these two conflicting values that we have in our identity, because everybody wants to feel like they belong, and yet at the same time, everybody wants to stand out. Right? We all want to be different, and yet we all want to be the same. We want to belong to something, and so what we end up doing is we belong to a certain culture or subculture, and then we try to, within that subculture, stand out. So you choose, I'm going to be a hipster. Great. Now you're a hipster. Now what kind of hipster? And you're going to try to stand out as a hipster. Oh, I'm preppy. Okay, that's what a preppy am. And I'm going to try to stand out as a preppy. Oh, I'm going to be, and we pick our category that we belong in, but then we want that significance. So we want to stand out in some way. I don't want to just meld in and just kind of disappear. The challenge with missions is that what really gets attacked is significance and belonging. When you first go to the field, there is loss in these two areas. They feel the lack of significance, especially now, if you don't speak the language. You start off and you're learning the language, and sometimes that takes 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on the country you go to. If it's Japan, a lot of the missionaries in Japan, they reckon it's about 7 years. If they're from America, they're going to learn Japanese, and it's going to be about 7 years. The director of our mission was a missionary in Japan, the international director, and he tells a story of after being there, I think it was for like 8 months or something like that. He was walking home from Japanese class, and he saw this old lady giving commands to a dog on the street. And the dog was obeying her, but she was using a lower form of Japanese, apparently, that they hadn't taught him in school. And so the dog was obeying the lady, and he looked at this lady, and he thought, the dog understands her, and I don't. I've been studying for 8 months, and the dog understands more than I do. And he was just like this incredibly depressing moment for him. Depending on the country, that can be a long time. Americans tend to believe as a culture, this is what I've experienced, that in 3 months you're going to be fluent. They're like, and they tell this to people. Oh, you'll get it so fast. 6 months you'll be speaking like a Spaniard. No, you won't. 6 months you're going to sound like a drugged child. That's what you're going to sound like. You don't sound good at 6 months. Nobody does. Now, at 6 months, if you really throw yourself into it and you are not afraid to make mistakes and you speak, you can get by. In Spanish, at least, you can get to the point to where you could like make big hand gestures and figure things out with people and make things move forward. And so many people, I think, would say, well, there you go. You've made it. Yeah, you can speak. But in missions, to do marriage and family therapy with someone, you need to be beyond the point of making big hand gestures to get your point across. You need to be able to share heart. You need to be able to share more than just God loves you. You need to go to the depths of that. You need to get theological truths that are profound and deep. You can't just say, God love you much. That doesn't fly as a missionary. And you have to be able to connect with them. You need to be able to laugh with them. You need to be able to cry with them. This is requiring a level of language that when most people talk about, how long did it take you to get fluent? Well, that's a never-ending search. I was with a Spaniard when a visiting person asked me, Giles, how long did it take you to learn Spanish? And the Spaniard interrupted and he said, do you mean how long has he been learning Spanish? As if it's not like I've learned it, because they're constantly correcting me. Significance and belonging get challenged because you go to the field and you belonged to a family, to a church. You still belong to that family, but family, church, friends, your work environment, your community, you lose all that. It's all gone as you go to the field. No, it's not completely gone. You can talk to them on Skype, especially today. You got connections, but it's different, and you feel that difference. And significance, for some people, learning Spanish or learning the language or whatever they're learning is not like this great significant thing, like, look how amazing I am. And you come to the field to do these great things for God. You have these gifts that you're dying to use, and you're useless. And I felt that very strongly when I first went to Spain. And I think one of my gifts that God uses in me a lot is in teaching. And I love to teach, and I love to talk with people. And here I was, and I couldn't say anything. I couldn't understand them, let alone I couldn't understand them. I could say a few things, but then they would answer me. And I could ask, where's the bathroom? They're like, blah, 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 blah. Can you just point? Because I didn't understand you. So when significance and belonging go away, then you're left with just worth standing there. And worth, that self-worth of that person ends up toppling. And what we've discovered for a lot of missionaries is there's this pain, and the pain that they're feeling, and they can't even quite understand it. And there's this sense of lack of worth, a lack of value. Their whole identity now is being challenged. And they don't even understand it because, well, I'm here to learn Spanish, and I don't understand what's the big deal. But their very worth is now threatened by what they're going through. And I think in some ways you could argue that foreign missions could be almost designed to create this struggle, because who goes into missions other than someone who's relational? Usually people who hate people don't go into missions, right? If you just don't like people, you're probably not thinking about going overseas into missions. And so you're taking people, in most cases, who are highly relational and putting them in a place where they can't relate. And it's just designed for this. They come in, and it's like, ah. And I think it's important. This is a thing, you can figure out, all I'm talking about here, a lot of these things are in difference of languages. Figure out, before you go to the field, how you are with learning languages. It kind of amazes me when we have people come to Spain, and it's like they're shocked that they got to learn Spanish. You did know you came to Spain, right? And I think it's fair enough to say, there are English-speaking places you could go. If you hate learning languages, then don't go into missions in a country where you have to learn a language, or get over that hatred because God's calling you there and you better deal with it. But I think perhaps some people, they do have that mindset, like, oh, it's going to be 3 months, then I'll be fluent. And it's I can do with anything for 3 months. No, it's your rest of your life. The rest of your life you're going to be learning this. You're going to need to continually learn and practice to be able to connect with them, to be able to understand. This isn't just a thing that you learn for a little bit of time and then you're done. So, you can go to England, you can go to New Zealand, you can go to Australia, you could go to Nigeria, right? They speak English there, right? Although there they say sleeping instead of nap, so I don't know how we could possibly understand. We were talking about that before. England, the boot of the car, things like that, it can be very confusing. But so this worth being threatened, what ends up happening is the person really has this sense of just suffering that they don't quite even understand where it's coming from. And you don't have the support in your life that you had before. Here's my other drawing now. This is not a stool. This is one of those watering cans. Can you suspend belief and believe that? And then this is a bucket. And the bucket has water in it, right? Look at that, see? Okay. Now this watering can has these streams of water that are falling down into it. And these streams of water are what's filling you. Go away. You had your family. You had your friends. You had your work environment. You had your church, the small group, and all the people that are part of that. You even had the hobbies, your favorite hobbies that you did. And you had, well, certainly we hope, your relationship with God, right? And all these things were pouring into your bucket before you went to the field, filling your bucket. You say, I feel full, I'm excited, I'm pleased with life. But then you go to the field, and we assign you to a church. So you attend church, but you don't understand anything they're saying, and you don't understand their culture, and these people definitely do not feel like the body of Christ to you. It might be many years before they're the body of Christ to you. You have your family on Skype, but really, they're far away. You might have your friends on Skype, and WhatsApp and Facebook or whatever, but they're far away too. What you did in your work or your ministry, you don't have that anymore. Now you're learning the language, or now you're observing the cultures. You don't have that anymore. Even the hobbies that you used to love to do, that can be one of the harshest points. This person really loves to, they loved playing on their baseball team, or they loved, I always got involved in a, volleyball club, or, I was really into this, basketball thing that I had. Well, maybe in that culture where they have it, that hobby, and at the very least you don't, even if it exists, you don't know how to find it. And so boom, that hobby goes. And you're left really with God. How much does your relationship with God really fill you? And this is one of those things that could be viewed as a major negative, or I like to try to challenge our new missionaries to think of it as a major positive. It is a once in a life, perhaps, opportunity to really be able to see how big your God stream really is. Because it's really hard to tell right now. You got all these other things filling in, and it's only when they're all removed that you can see that. Now, let me be really clear. I'm not one of those, and I actually don't even like the worship songs that are like, you're all I want, you're all I need. I want hamburgers, and he's not a hamburger. God, I don't think, when we say, you're all I need, well, God created Adam, and then he said, it is not good for him to be alone. And he created Eve. What do you mean alone, God? You were there. Weren't you enough? And God said, no. Adam by himself, that was not good. I want him to have companionship that is beyond what I offer. God created us to live in community. He created us to have other people. So I don't say this in the sense of like, you should only need God and you shouldn't need anybody else and you should be perfectly fine with only God and nobody else. That, I think, is some ultra-spiritual, non-biblical nonsense, really. I think God clearly in the Bible designed us to live in community. So this is clearly a temporary thing. It is a season, but yet it is a necessary season and perhaps an unavoidable season. And you say, no, that's not going to happen to me, because I'm going to have a team. I'm going to go be a part of a team. So don't worry about that. I got that covered. They're my community. And now, this is the great danger of expecting this team to be the body of Christ, to be your family, to be your friends, to be everything to you. And this team, most likely, has ministry that they're involved in too. You see, like the new missionary comes in and they're joining into a team with other missionaries, and their life isn't all about you, but your life is all about them, because you got nothing else. You got nothing going on except for learning your language maybe, and it's like, so you're like, come be with me, I don't have anybody else. And they got thousands of people that need them. They got like the door ringing every day, the doorbell and the phone, and they got all these people, all these nationals that need them, and you're just one. And you want that team. That team's gonna fill you. And maybe not. Maybe you do have a situation where the team, it's like 10 of you that are brand new, and you're all gonna be team for each other, and you're all community for each other. That could work, although the real shame and danger with that is that your community as a missionary should not be from other missionaries. Why did you go to that field? Why did God call you there? To connect to missionaries? Did he call you there to connect with and make buddies with missionaries? Or did he call you there for the people that are there? If you're going to thrive in this country, if you're going to grow, then it's going to be with the nationals of that nation. That's going to be your network. It's when that body of Christ really becomes your body of Christ that you will thrive. And there is always that danger that if your team provides somehow, amazingly, everything that the body of Christ, your family, and your friends ever survived for you, then you won't need to depend on others in the culture, and that is a great disadvantage to you. So, what we even say to our missionaries is, we want to help you as you're coming in. We want to help you as you're struggling through these things, but I don't want to help you too much. I want you to suffer a little. It should be a little hard. It should be. In fact, since you don't, even this team, they can't immediately replace, like you don't have that same connection immediately with them that you had with these lifelong friends, perhaps. So it needs to be a season. And in that season, you evaluate how wide, how thick, how deep is my relationship with God. And sometimes one of the things you find is that your relationship with God, at least this is what I found. This was me personally. You'll find that your relationship with God really it was more like a work relationship. And once I wasn't doing ministry, I go, what do we talk about? I wasn't like evangelizing. I wasn't discipling. I was just learning Spanish. I didn't really need to talk to him about conjugating verbs. And so it was kind of like all of our conversation topics went away. And why am I studying the Bible? Why am I praying? And I just felt this incredible in my passion. I felt more nominal as a believer than I'm like, crying out loud, I got to become a missionary to become a nominal believer. That beginning time there, and it was a real challenge. And I had to come to a point of realizing my relationship with God, that God wanted my relationship with him to be more than just work partners. That this was a matter of talking through and working with him through matters of the heart, matters of mind, things I'm thinking through, trivial, dumb stuff. What I thought of the movie I just watched. Like going through with God from the profound to the superficial, from the ridiculous to the sublime. And dealing with him in all of it and having God penetrate every part of my life. This was an incredibly revealing time for me. And I think it can be, for a missionary, a wonderful time if they use it for that purpose. The trick with this is that we often don't realize how much of our worth is wrapped up in what we do well. And how little of our worth comes from being God's child and from his approval. Because really, if you think about the phrase, what I do well, that's just a nice way of saying what I do better than others. Right? Because how do you determine well? What is your definition of well? And where does it come from? Your definition of well comes from what you do better than most other people do. If just about everybody around you does this thing better, you probably won't conclude that you do it well. Like, no, I'm not very good at that. Everybody's better than that than me. If you do it better than most, you're like, yeah, I do that quite well. And in the end, our self-worth comes from this comparison game that we play. And then you go to the field where you're worse at everything than everybody. You're the worst. You just stink at it all. Everything. And you get constantly humiliated. You just say stuff and everybody laughs at you. You say swear words without meaning to. I swore in a church meeting and everybody went, and I was like, and what did I just say? And they're like, don't say that again. I'm like, okay, sorry. Yeah, and it was even, my swear was blasphemous. I was trying to say they put Jesus on a donkey, and I used a swear word for the donkey. So I was talking about Jesus and swear words, and it was just like, oh my goodness, I can't go any more blasphemous than I have right now. We've all been taught to compare, this comparison game of, I'll just leave that there, this comparison game of what do I do well, what do I do better? And it comes down, you realize that your worth, your value doesn't necessarily come so much from God's glory, but from you being the best. Have you ever heard this? It's actually a phrase attributed to St. Jerome, which is total garbage because he never said it. Just like Pastor Moody said this morning with that quote from St. Francis of Assisi, yeah. But there's this phrase that they say, good, better, best, never let it rest until your good is better and your better is best. You heard that phrase? Good, better, best, never let it rest until your good is better and your better is best. That is true garbage, right? I mean, that's just straight up garbage. Till your better is best. God could absolutely care less if you're best at anything, right? Because that's just a total comparison. Your identity cannot be in what you do well or what you do better than others at. God doesn't care what you're the best at. He only expects of you to use what he has given you. For that, you think of the parable of Matthew 25. You know that parable, right? Well, how many did he give? He gave to one servant, how many? 5. And then 2, then 1, right? 5, 2, 1. And to the servant he gave 5, he came back and he had 10. To the servant he gave 2, he came back and he had 4. And the servant he gave 1, he hid it, and he came back with 1, right? Now I want to read something to you. Just in Matthew 25, I'm going to read to you the verse where God, the master, speaks to the one. In verse 21, the man who received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you trusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. In verse 21, he says, his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the next verse is where the man with 2 bags of gold came, and the master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. And listen to verse 23. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. What difference do you see between those 2 responses? Word for word, identical. He could have said 4. He's got 10. Look at this guy. He got 10. You got 4. Why don't you have 10 like him? It was completely irrelevant. His better was not best. Best was 10. 10's better than 4. 10 is most certainly better than 4. Has to be. And even in this context, 10 is better than 4. But he had been given 5 and he had been given 2. And so the question was, what have you done with what I have given you? This is what God is going to come to us with. This is our focus instead of comparison. And sometimes it isn't until we have those things stripped away that we really begin to see how much of our worth is wrapped up in this sense of like my accomplishment, what I can do. I can get these 10 things done today, and I do them so well, and I do them so fast. And now I can't do anything, and I feel worthless. And the identity goes shooting down. And sometimes for some of those people, the only solution is just when they finally can do stuff, and then they can feel better about themselves. And I think that's a great shame. I think they should take advantage of this time to realize that was a lie. My value, my worth, my identity, none of it was based on that to begin with. So I'd like to take a moment then for you to reflect. I'm going to give you a moment to just reflect with the Lord on this. And then I'll open it up, and you have comments or questions. We can definitely talk. I wanted to leave time so that we can do that, right? So we still have time to do that. But here's what I want you to ask the Lord. I want you to talk to the Lord about this. I want you to because if you're preparing for missions, all this is great to know, but you can prepare for missions by dealing with some of those things with the Lord now. Before you go to the field, you talk to the Lord about how many of my issues, how much of my personal relationship with you how is my personal relationship with you sustaining me? How much of my self-worth comes from what I do well? So I want you to ask the Lord. Ask him these 3 questions. First, ask him this. I'm going to give you a moment to think on it. Ask him, Lord, how much of my identity is wrapped up in doing things well? And what I can accomplish and what I can do and what I am good at? How much of my identity is wrapped up in that? And if that were taken away, how hard would it be for me to conclude that I was valuable and that I had purpose? Ask him that. Meditate on that with him for a moment. And just make it be a little prayer to him to say, Lord, let my identity be wrapped up in you and what you've given me and what I do with what you've given me. And if you choose to take it away, then that is your choice. Now take a moment to ask him, Lord, how do you see my personal relationship with me? Would it be enough to sustain me for a time if you were all I had? Where do you see my relationship with you, Lord? Where do you see the intimacy between you and I? Could I thrive with you and you alone for a time, knowing it's not long term, but could I? What would need to happen in my relationship with you, Lord, to prepare me for that? Ask him that. Meditate on that for a moment. Amen. All right, now I'm going to close the way I prefaced. this is all generalities. So you might go to the field and you'd be like, I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't experience any of that. Totally, yeah. Not everybody deals with the same. I think when I went to Spain, my wife spoke Spanish, so I had a totally easier situation. I could just kind of bank on her, and so she helped me fly through a lot of stuff. We see other couples come where neither of them speak Spanish, and it's just a lot harder for them than it was for me. So I'm speaking in generalities. Secondly, missions is awesome. It's awesome to go and serve the Lord in a place that he's calling you to be. Because you can't be anywhere else. In the end, when the Lord calls you, you just can't be anywhere else. There's nowhere else to be. It's miserable to be anywhere outside of what God's calling you to be. And when you are where he has called you to be, there are so many blessings thrown into that it makes it all far more worthwhile. And God is no man's debtor. So I say that because I don't want it to be just like this downer thing, like you're in Tennessee and it's so horrible, and isn't missions so difficult and so hard and horrible. So there you go. All right. I open the floor to comments, questions. We can have it. It doesn't have to all go to me. It can go across to other people. There can be conversation here. People can answer what other people have said, but I'd like to open it up to any comments or questions that people would like to make on this topic of identity. Let me see if I can do justice to what you're saying. So how would this translate into different cultures or people that aren't in the church? Speaking of the Asian context, where specifically that you're experienced with the achievement being everything, you have no value if you can't achieve. But what was the question in that then? So what's I mean that's. Right, yeah. Yeah. Oh, if you don't understand the language? If you don't understand the language, you don't. That's the answer. That's part of the frustration, where you're like, you talk to that person, you really want to explain to them this concept of identity, and you're like, God love you much. And that's about all you can say. You're like, dang it. I had this beautiful thought in my head, and I couldn't get it out. Yeah, I mean, I think in those different cultures, as you're talking to people, I mean, it's a matter of removing the Christian jargon, but I don't think, I mean, talking about belonging, significance, and worth, these are things that's something that everybody all over the world is dealing with. And I mean, I love the Matthew 25 parable, and I think it's cool to take that to different cultures and say, how do you view that? How do you take that? I mean, why didn't he tell better done to the 10 guy instead of the 4 guy? Why did they both get the exact same thing? They both got the same pat on the back when one was clearly inferior. And you ask that question. I mean, how do they see it? I don't know. Does anybody else here have any other backgrounds with Asian cultures or any other places that are around the world? What would they offer with that question?
Like even in an Asian context, like we can illustrate that sort of the value of something beyond just how we achieve things by like you say you're teaching in a classroom, and usually the monitor is the student in the class that everyone has to report to, and the monitor reports to the teacher. But you can even, I don't know, I mean, there's kind of favoritism shown to that one student, so there's even ways to go around that by really calling out someone who is really kind or generous, or someone who's really, you know what I mean? Okay, it is more intimidating up here.
Don't say that. No, that was easy. So I'll specifically address Asian culture too a little bit, and it depends on where you are, right? So there, you look at Southeast Asian, where it's all really, really, really simple and laid back, and then you have the kind of the East Asia islands and China and stuff that are really, really hard work. But in all those cultures, there's something to find where there's this, I'm not tied to the world, I'm not tied to, I want to put in the right words. There's a tenet of, if you, and this flows into a lot of kinds of Buddhism and other Eastern spirituality is that if you are tied to possessions, if you are tied to people in the wrong way, then you are encumbering yourself. And I think there's an element of truth to that, where we say we're not, we're not beholden on our performance in that way, that there's something else more. And we teach them what that something else more is, that their culture has been seeking for centuries, millennia, and to say, this is who it is. God is here, and it's different in every culture, and you're going to find that in every little conversation. There's a way that if you just you listen to God's leading in the conversation, and you are patient in the conversation, because sometimes it takes decades of relationship to get to that point where you can make that connection, but it's always there somehow.
Yeah, I think going on the Asian culture, and just a lot of cultures are more indirect with communication, and I think like the parable that you brought up, storytelling can be such a powerful way to convey really deep truths. And I imagine, I'm not a good storyteller, and I really would love coaching and storytelling if anyone's good at that, but I imagine that it's something that you could still manage to do somewhat well with small language proficiency. So obviously language is important, and improving that, but if you could learn to tell this parable with just enough language that could convey that same message. And
Giles, why don't you tell us just a little bit about specifically the Spanish culture, and how the youth that you've worked with sort of what they find their identity in, and what they tend, was mentioned achievement. Is there something else that someone in the Spanish culture, maybe the youth, they tend to do that?
I don't think it's not that different from a lot of the cultures. It's really ends up being family and lifelong friends, and it's much more in Spain. The idea is that you're going to live in the same town that you grew up in. You're going to, when you look for a job, you're gonna go to university in the town where you live. You're gonna look for a job in the area around where you live. You're gonna live there. You're gonna stay connected to family. You're going to stay connected to friends that you have when you're 45, or the friends that you went to school with. This is kind of the picture of what the Spanish society is, and their identity. So it's interesting, in the high schools, there really isn't, there are the kids that think that they're the popular crowd, but there is not the same kind of dynamic in the States where you have the popular kids and then the unpopular kids, because it's just they're all their little groups, and they're just these little groups of their best friends, and it's this group, and then there's this group, and this group might think they're cooler, but you're just your group, and we're our group, and there's this group, and you've got your little, they call it a pandilla, your little group of buddies, your little gang, and that you have for the rest of your life. And I think there's a lot of identity wrapped up in that and in family, which is then one of the things that does, in the same way with Muslim cultures, what makes it so hard for somebody, if they're going to move to an evangelical understanding of the gospel, move towards Christ, if their family and their friend network is not, if they sees that, which in Spain evangelicals are viewed as a cult. They clunk us in with Mormons and Jehovah's Witness, and yeah, you guys like the Mormons, right? And I'm no, I don't like the Mormons. And so for them, it's really hard, because it's just this big jump, and it's breaking with family, breaking with that tradition. It's like Christmas is for American families. It's they have all these different traditions and realities that are for them in Spain, and so it's a big part. That's a big part of who they are, is defined by who they've always known, and those people know you. And I feel in America, I don't know. When I went to college, I put my resume out all over America, and I was disappointed that I only got to go an hour and a half away. I ended up in Antioch, Illinois. I was dang it, I wanted to go to California, but that's where I ended up getting hired. Whereas them, I got kids that I'm working with, or not kids, well, they're in their 20s now, who are looking for a job, and they can't find a job, but it's because they're looking on the east side of Madrid. That's the only. They're not even looking on the west side of Madrid. They're just there. How about Barcelona? How about Extremadura? How about in the south? No. They're just looking in this like 40-kilometer radius, and they can't find a job. Of course you can't find a job. But then eventually they do. They just keep looking and keep looking. They live with mom and dad, and they keep looking and looking and looking, and then they find it. Which is probably the biggest difference in Spain, I would say, to America, is in the sense that in the States, if you're 22 or 24 and you live with your parents, it's a little embarrassing, right? Or it's a little bit like you have to explain it. And if you're 18 and you don't go away and don't start off your college, it's kind of like, what a shame, he really hasn't launched. In Spain, if you're 18 and you leave the home to go to a different college, a different place, or you leave, everybody thinks there's something wrong. There was something wrong here with your family. Why would that kid not want to live with his parents? What is wrong in this family? And when you're 26, I had a guy in my youth group who was 26. He had a job. He had the money. He was thinking about moving out of his parents' house and renting an apartment. The thing that was keeping him back was feeling guilty about abandoning his parents. That's it's just a whole different mindset. And Americans will look at that and will say, that's immature. He should be independent. And a Spaniard would look at that. So the American looks at it like, that's so sad. He should be independent. That's not mature. The Spaniard looks at the American and says, that's so sad. Why would he want to be independent? Why would he want to be rid of his family? How sad that your kids want to leave when they're 18. They can't die to get out of your house? That's sad. So I think that's a big difference in as far as, so your identity becoming, they're growing up and I'm with my parents and you're 26 years old and he's walking around with his mom and dad at the fair or whatever. And that's like, that's good. That's like, nobody's like, you're 26 years old. Come on, man, get a life. No, and everybody's cool with that. So I guess that would be my answer to that, if that makes sense. But
I've been wrestling with this question that you asked because identity, to me, is also a big barrier to people coming to Christ. And because if they don't find their identity in Christ, then and belonging is a big part of that. And I was thinking about how do we, in some ways, people need to come to a crisis of identity in whatever culture they're in, and that crisis of identity might move them towards a new question about finding it somewhere else. And probably in different cultures it's going to be different. I was thinking of another story, so go back to the story idea. When Jesus told Peter to cast your nets on the other, or to fish, he said, "Did you?" And Peter says, "Look, I fished all night and didn't catch anything," and that was his identity. He was a fisherman, and he didn't succeed in it. And when Jesus said, "Now do it my way," and do it again, and he caught all that stuff, there was something that happened to Peter, and he said he threw himself down on his knees and said, "My Lord and my God, this is it. This is it." And I think that is the identity crisis. And I think that's the question when you look at the belonging. So belonging seems like that's the Spanish thing. Achievement is maybe an Asian thing or whatever. They probably are all mixed together in some different ratios. But if we're going to use the identity question, but I think it's really a critical question. I just thought that was really awesome. And where I work, people, there's kind of this tension about belonging and stuff too. And people who are really lost in their identity sometimes are more open to the gospel. But on the other hand, oftentimes those are also marginal people in the society. And instead of winning a person who is sort of a key person in that society that can break it open, you win a marginal person, which is also a person God loves. But that key person has his identity wrapped up in his keyness. So that's a hard person. That probably isn't a helpful thing, but it's just an observation.
So, Giles, in the picture of the watering can with the streams, and you said, like, when you're in a different context, all else is kind of removed and you have just God, it's really hard for someone who's not in that context at the time to know how much they're relying on that. I was just wondering, for any of you who have experienced that, where it's been stripped away and you feel like it's just you and God now, what advice would you give to those who haven't been in that situation yet, as far as like, what can we do now to be cultivating that awareness, or just like practical disciplines of working on our relationship with the Lord?
One, I should have said it, but I recommend, taking a day or a weekend alone with God. A full day or a full weekend, and you go off, and it's just you, and it's just the Lord, and see how that goes for you. Do you sometimes you get people go off, and they're like, after like an hour, they're like, okay, I'm all done. I got nothing else here. And so it just requires you to dig in and see what is there. How can this go any deeper? Because 1 hour you were done. They ran through all their whole prayer list, and now they're just sitting there reading for 3 hours or something. They're like, And so I think that's a good way, if you do that, to see. You go away with a spouse, you go away for a weekend, and that's great. So you should be able to go away with the Lord for a weekend. Not saying that you got to go to an ivory tower and live with Him, all alone with God forever, but for a weekend or a day. Start with a day and just see, how does that time go? How is that with the Lord? Does that fill you, or is it like, oh, that was exhausting? I didn't know what to talk about. Well, that's something then to work on, and say, how can this needs to be more fluid, more intimate. I shouldn't just be tired of you, Lord, after an hour. This should be something where we're really enjoying each other. And I think that's a good way to test and just see what's there. That would be one idea.
Something that came to mind was I'm preparing to speak in Brazil in the letter of 2 Corinthians. And I would immerse yourself in 2 Corinthians. God's power and weakness. When you feel weak, when things are going badly, very badly. Paul says he felt the sentence of death, but that was so that he might rely on God rather than anything else going on. I also think of 2 Corinthians with this idea of identity, because you have Paul being compared to all these super apostles and his identity and his acceptance by them. And they were comparing with one another, chapter 10, and Paul didn't have as great speaking skills as they, and some would just kind of flounder in that, I'm not as great as these super apostles. But Paul is, no, I've got the gospel. I've got this treasure in a broken vessel. And thus I don't lose heart. And it might look foolish to some who have certain fleshly standards, because people do have fleshly standards out there. But this is who I am, because 2 Corinthians is about what true Christian ministry is in very difficult times. So I would immerse in 2 Corinthians.
One thing I would say too is, especially for those of you who haven't or don't feel like you have, I would say the power of the cross and the power of the gospel is amazing. And I think everybody has things that are hard in our lives. And I think whatever those things are, I think, surely everybody can think of something that's hard. Either a beloved person who has not accepted Christ yet, or a difficult relationship, or a coworker who's treating you poorly, or just some hard thing that everybody has. And I would say just really take that to the cross and ask the Lord, how does the truth of the gospel and how does the truth of what Jesus did for me impact this situation? So I would say practice on whatever hard things you do have, just they're there for all of us. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Giles, and thank you, everybody, for your comments and your questions. What we're going to do right now is transition to a time of getting to know one another at your tables, and then we're going to start to pray.